So turning back to one of the issues we cover regularly on here on In the Dugout is energy, climate change, the cost of energy, the left's overreaching policy. So we welcome back to In the Dugout Joe Trotter from the American Legislative Exchange Council. Joe, you are the director of ALEC's Energy, Environment, and Agricultural Task Force. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me again.
Excuse me. All right. So we have a post up that you, based on a report and an email you sent around recently. I love the title, The Coal-Powered Electrification Agenda, Separating Fantasy from Reality. I've talked often about coal-powered cars. You know, these electric vehicles really originally are powered by cars. What's your article about?
So it takes a look at Vermont, but also sort of a wider trend, which is trying to electrify absolutely everything. And by that, I mean heat pumps, you know, the things that heat your water, keep you warm during the winter, cars. They're looking for absolutely everything to be run off the electric grid.
No more gas stove.
No more gas stoves, even though they're cheaper and cheaper in the long run. And personally, I prefer cooking on them. But it takes a look at sort of two things. One, a PJM report. PJM covers, I believe it's 13 states in terms of the electric grid. And it takes a look at Vermont and the electric grid up in the Northeast in the New England area. Now, Vermont is a very interesting state. They have a very high renewable portfolio standard, which basically just means they have to use renewable resources to power their grid. And they have the highest RPS in the country, where they're aiming for 50% of the grid to be run off of these renewables. And they took their one nuclear reactor offline, and they have a whole lot of solar, a whole lot of hydro, but they import most of their electricity from out of state, and actually from out of the country. A lot of it comes from Canada. But the thing that really got me is where the rest of that energy comes from. And it's mainly wood. They take scrap wood and
So before you go there, so they shut down their nuclear reactor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And would you say that the renewable energy made up that difference that was shut down?
Oh, absolutely not. They wound up having to get most of it from out of state.
So that's why they're importing so much, and that's why they're burning so much wood, because they took away a major source and they didn't have anything in state, at least that was green, to replace it with. I mean, and this is a common advocacy of the left. They shut down reliable and cheap energy sources and abundant, and then replace it with more expensive, less reliable, and less abundant sources, right? That's the same mistake we're seeing everywhere, isn't it?
Yep. And it's more than just that, though. With this push towards electrification, they're pushing people to rely more on the grid. Now, here at ALEC and me personally, we believe in an all of the above approach when it comes to energy. So in the case of electrification, if something happens with the grid, everything goes down. Heat goes down, power goes down, your cars will go down because they can't be charged. It's a real problem. It's putting all of your eggs in one basket. And beyond that, it's also this push to generally put the source of the electricity into one or two baskets that aren't necessarily as reliable as technology that's been around for 100 years for generating electricity.
Well, Rhode Islanders should care. We have the second highest energy costs and some of the highest electricity costs in the nation. You talk about Vermont, we're heading that way here in Rhode Island as well. Now, you've got, now ALEC is known for its model legislation. Mm-hmm. And you actually have legislation that I want to show everybody that you suggest lawmakers consider. It's called the Electric Generation Facility Closures and Reliability Act. What does that do?
So basically, what it does is it says, don't shut down power sources generation sources before their replacements are online. It's not saying, hey, you have to go in one direction or the other. It simply says don't take the generators offline until whatever is replacing it is online. And it should seem like common sense there. But if anything, the demand for electricity is growing, especially with this push towards electrification. But what is happening is nuclear plants, coal plants, even natural gas plants are being taken offline before the replacements, which are supposedly solar and wind. And I mean, more on that in a bit. But before those farms are on the grid. So you've got
Well, I
there,
get it. It's the same thing with my wife. I'm going to make a joke here, but it's true. I, my wife loves to throw away my old toothbrushes, but don't throw it away till you get me a new one. Yeah. Well, what do I do in the meantime, right? So let's not throw away nuclear, coal, and all that till we get something new to replace it. Same idea, right?
yeah, and there's nothing wrong with increased efficiency. There's nothing wrong with new technology, but it's got to be implemented before we take the old sources offline, especially when we're artificially through these top-down government measures creating an increased demand. It's messing with the market on the supply and the demand side.
Well,
So
and here's a perfect example of that in California. We all know the story. So they want the California is trying to force everybody to buy electric vehicles. In Rhode Island, we have by law we have to follow California emission standards and rules. So we too have to phase out internal combustion engine automobiles for sale by within the next 10 years. But they don't have enough power on the grid to do the cars. So right after they push you to force you to buy them, now they're saying, "Oh, yeah, but you can't charge them." This is what you're talking about, right?
exactly. And we're having the same problem in Virginia. Virginia has the exact same standards. California itself is forgetting for a moment how unreliable their grid is and how high their energy prices are. They simply don't have the charging stations to go around. They're pushing not just in the more short term, they're pushing for companies like Uber and Lyft and these rideshare programs to they're basically trying to force them to make their fleets all electric, which is
Yeah.
kind of a problem because just on those numbers alone, again, forgetting reliability, which is just awful out there, they can't even charge all these cars if pretending for a moment they had the generation sources.
Are we heading back to this?
I mean that bikes running or it's not great.
Um, let me ask you to digress. I mean, I'll encourage people go to Ocean State Current, read the article that Joe wrote there. It's a great piece. I might come back to the article at the end, but I want to get to a few other things. There's been a leaked memo recently from the Biden administration, as much as they publicly denied it about a month ago, but they really are seriously looking at banning gas stoves.
All right, so they really want to take away your gas stove, and this push came somewhat out of nowhere. But if you take a look at who's pushing this, there are a few billionaires who are pushing this particular agenda, and it's being done under several different guises. You've got the climate change people who are saying, "Oh, gas is bad." You've got the
Saying
health.
it's unhealthy, right?
Yeah, they're also saying it's unhealthy, saying, oh, it's causing lung issues with children, which is a little ironic because they've got this whole push for complete renewables on ethanol in terms of cars. Well, if you run a car on ethanol during the summer, it's going to create ozones and other contaminants that are also going to cause problems for children. So there's this just concerted push out there, and it doesn't really make sense beyond the, oh no, it's burning fossil fuels. And it's interesting because there are experiments out there and technologies such as hydrogen that are could potentially one day replace natural gas, but the technology to create it on a large scale just isn't there currently. And the one that is, ironically, is creating it from coal power.
I want to ask you about this. We had a senator on. I don't know if you've seen. You guys basically write model legislation. I don't know if this legislation came from you or from other state, but here's an article. We had the senator who put up this bill. It was a bipartisan bill, by the way. We call it the Rhode Island's Real Green Deal. I call it what's good for the goose is good for the gander bill. And basically, what it said is if you're going to hold fossil fuels to these emission standards, if you want to talk about mining and the use of it, and then the emissions that result of it, we need to do the same thing with green energy. What is the cost, the environmental impact, the ethical impact, whether it's child labor or whatever other abuses in the Congo or Nigeria or wherever? What is the total cost of energy from mining, production, usage, emissions and disposal? And she basically said, before you do any green new project, you've got to answer all those questions. What's the total cost of that energy to the environment or to human rights in that regard? That bill is in. It's gotten some bipartisan sponsorship in the Rhode Island Senate. Have you seen or heard of that bill anywhere else in the country?
So I've heard of it. It did not come through us. And when we do model policy, it comes from our state legislators. ALEC as a staff doesn't do it. My job's more to coordinate everything and then talk about the issues once our members have decided to. That would be a very interesting model policy to go through our model policy process.
Yeah,
And
I encourage you to take a look at it. It's a brilliant bill. It's basically just holding the left to the same standards they want to impose on everybody else.
the unfortunate truth is green energy isn't all that green. It like you mentioned, everything that goes into it, whether it's solar panels, the magnets that power the windmills, all of that comes for the most part from overseas, from the Congo, from China, from
And really, really
Afghanistan.
abusive labor conditions too, right?
Abusive labor conditions, generally awful regimes in terms of human rights, the actual emissions that go into mining all of this, it creates environmental catastrophes. About a decade ago, there was this incident in China where a solar manufacturer had some leak. Every single plant within a few miles in every direction of the plant turned white, just died straight up. It poisoned the ground. And the unfortunate reality is no technology, no generation source is totally free of an environmental impact. And I'm going to take more of a look at this legislation, but
I'll send it to you. But having said what you just said, the environmental impact, is it fair? I postulated in my comments and to the senator. Now I'll ask you, based on everything I've read, and you know a hell of a lot more than this than I do. This is your expertise. It's a legitimate question to ask. Is green energy really any less environmentally damaging when you look at the totality of the cost of it, like we just talked about, from the whole beginning to end, cradle to grave, than fossil fuel energy? Do you have an opinion on that, or do you just think that is a legitimate question we need to start asking?
it is a legitimate question. And the answer can be found in some of the marketing terminology there. When you look at, for solar panels, for example, they advertise, like a 10 or 15-year payback period. And what that actually means is it takes 10 years of 100% efficient use to make up for all the pollution that went into making that panel.
Wow.
So, yeah, and they don't always operate 100% efficiency, especially in areas northeast where the weather could be not great. That means it's operating peak efficiency with perfect weather conditions. Doesn't really happen. It degrades over time. And so what's actually happening is they're saying that every solar panel, let's say they claim to have a 10-year payback period, what they're actually saying is they put 10 years worth of pollution that one house would,
I got you. I
essentially
got it.
generate into the atmosphere, into the ground, everything like that, before it is a cleaner energy source.
We
than
gotta, as a
coal-fired
country,
power plant.
as a world, we gotta look more at this. You've been putting out, sorry, time is short. He is Joe Trotter with the Trotter. His piece is on the Ocean State Current, separating fantasies from reality. This coal-powered electrification. Remember that, folks. Coal-powered does not necessarily mean coal, but it really means fossil fuel-powered. But much of our electrification is still going to come from fossil fuels, even if they want to pretend that using electricity is carbon free, carbon emission free. Joe Trotter, thanks for your very insightful analysis. Thanks for writing that piece. I'll
Thank
get you
you
that
so much.
legislation, and we'll look forward to having you back on in the dugout shortly.
It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Joe Trotter, American Legislative Exchange Council.